Funny how the wind always knows who's telling the truth. The paper lawn bag burst open the moment it hit my driveway. Hundreds of crisp autumn leaves spilled across the concrete, skittering around my boots before swirling into tiny whirlwinds that danced toward the curb. Susan Holloway stood at the edge of my front walk, breathing hard. Her perfectly pressed cream-colored jacket fluttered in the chilly October breeze, while one hand remained firmly planted on her hip. "I hope you're happy," she snapped. "These belong in your yard." Several neighbors had already stepped onto their porches after hearing the raised voices. Morning coffee mugs paused halfway to their lips. Garage doors remained open. A golden retriever stopped pulling on its leash and simply watched. I looked down at the leaves scattered across my driveway. Red maple, yellow sweet gum, a few dark burgundy sycamore leaves. Then I slowly lifted my eyes toward the only large tree in my front yard, a mature white oak. Its leaves were long, narrow, and deep brown this time of year. Not one of the leaves at my feet matched the tree standing behind me. Before I could answer, another gust of wind swept through Brookstone Meadows. It arrived with a low rushing sound, bending ornamental grasses and rattling porch decorations all along the street. Then something unexpected happened. A torrent of fresh leaves suddenly poured over the privacy fence behind Susan's house. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They rose into the air like a copper-colored wave before crashing across her perfectly manicured lawn. The neighbors watched in complete silence. The same wind that had carried her accusations now carried something else. Evidence. Susan spun around. No. Another gust followed. More leaves spilled over the fence, covering the flower beds she had proudly shown off during the HOA garden tour only a month earlier. A young father walking his daughter to school quietly looked toward the towering line of maple trees standing behind Susan's backyard. "So," he said almost absent-mindedly, "I guess they weren't coming from Ethan's oak after all." Nobody laughed. Nobody needed to. The wind had done all the talking. Susan looked from the growing blanket of colorful leaves covering her yard to the oak standing peacefully in front of my house. For the first time since I'd moved into Brookstone Meadows, she didn't seem to know what to say. The paper lawn bag she had emptied onto my driveway slowly rolled across the pavement before lodging against the curb. One last brown oak leaf drifted lazily from one of my branches. It landed gently beside dozens of bright red maple leaves that clearly didn't belong to my tree. I bent down and picked it up. One leaf, against hundreds. The difference couldn't have been more obvious. Susan quietly grabbed the empty paper bag without meeting anyone's eyes. She turned toward her driveway just as another powerful gust swept across the neighborhood. More maple leaves sailed over her fence. More neighbors stepped outside. More eyes followed the direction of the wind. Standing there beneath my oak, listening to thousands of leaves rustling across the subdivision, I realized something. The wind hadn't changed that morning. It had been blowing from the same direction for weeks. The only thing that finally changed was that everyone had stopped looking at me long enough to notice where the leaves were actually coming from. And the story of how one HOA president spent 6 weeks blaming the wrong tree began on the quiet morning I first unloaded my rake beside that very same oak. My moving truck pulled into Brookstone Meadows just after sunrise on the first Saturday of September. The neighborhood looked exactly like the brochure that had convinced me to buy the house. Wide sidewalks, freshly trimmed lawns, American flags swaying gently from front porches, rows of mature trees beginning to trade their summer green for hints of amber and gold. The first thing I unpacked wasn't a television or a coffee maker. It was my old wooden rake. Most people laughed when they saw it. My father had given it to me 20 years earlier when I bought my first house. "Leaves always come back," he'd said with a grin. "So don't waste your energy getting angry at them." At the time, I thought he was talking about yard work. Years later, I realized he meant something much bigger. I leaned the rake against the porch railing before taking a slow walk around the property. The oak in my front yard immediately caught my attention. It wasn't enormous, not like the century-old trees you find in city parks, but it was healthy, beautifully shaped, and already dropping the occasional brown leaf as autumn quietly approached. A gentle breeze carried one across the lawn before settling near the curb. Peaceful, predictable, natural. Exactly what I wanted after years of working nonstop as a landscape designer. I had spent most of my career helping families build outdoor spaces they actually enjoyed living in. Gardens, stone walkways, native plants. Shade trees. One lesson never changed. Nature never followed anyone's schedule. Around mid-morning, while I was assembling a small bench beneath the oak, I heard measured footsteps approaching across the sidewalk. I looked up. A woman wearing an immaculate navy cardigan, white slacks, and oversized sunglasses smiled as she stopped near my mailbox. "You must be Ethan." "I am." She extended a perfectly manicured hand. "Susan Holloway." Her handshake lasted only a moment. "I'm president of the Brookstone Meadows Homeowners Association. Nice to meet you." She glanced toward the oak before looking back at me. "You picked a lovely house." "Thank you." Another breeze drifted through the branches overhead. 3 dry leaves floated quietly onto my lawn. Susan watched them fall without saying anything. Then her smile became noticeably tighter. I should probably mention something now rather than later. I waited. "Those leaves," she pointed toward the grass, "have a habit of ending up in my yard." I blinked. "I imagine some of them do. I prefer keeping my lawn perfectly clean. I rake every weekend." She nodded. "I hope so." For a second, I wasn't sure whether she was joking. Her expression suggested she wasn't. The previous owner wasn't very attentive. She carefully chose each word. "I trust you'll be more proactive." I looked toward the oak again. A pair of chickadees landed briefly on one of the lower branches before disappearing into the canopy. "It's just a tree," I said with a smile. "It's autumn." Susan didn't smile back. "Leaves may be natural." She adjusted her sunglasses. "But they still have to end up somewhere." With that, she wished me a pleasant afternoon and walked back across the street toward her perfectly landscaped corner lot. I watched her disappear behind a row of ornamental maples planted along the rear fence of her property. The breeze shifted again. This time, I noticed dozens of bright red maple leaves lifting high above those very trees before drifting across the neighborhood. At the time, I barely paid attention. I assumed they belonged exactly where the wind carried them. I had no idea that those same leaves, and the direction they traveled, would soon become the center of the most ridiculous dispute our entire neighborhood had ever seen. The first complaint arrived exactly 5 days after I moved in. It wasn't a conversation. It wasn't even a knock on the door. It was an email waiting in my inbox when I sat down with my morning coffee. The subject line read, "Landscape Courtesy Notice." I almost ignored it. Instead, I opened the message and found 3 photographs attached. Each showed Susan's backyard. Each highlighted small piles of autumn leaves gathered near her flower beds. A single sentence appeared beneath the last picture. "These leaves are coming from your oak tree. Please address the issue immediately." I looked out the kitchen window toward the oak standing peacefully in my front yard. A handful of brown leaves rested beneath its branches exactly where they had fallen. Nothing unusual. Nothing excessive. I finished my coffee, grabbed my rake, and spent 20 minutes cleaning my lawn before leaving for work. By the time I returned that evening, another gentle breeze had carried fresh leaves across the neighborhood. Some rested against my fence. Others collected along the curb. It was early October. That was simply what autumn looked like. Saturday morning, I heard the familiar rumble of a gas-powered leaf blower somewhere down the street. The sound drifted closer until I saw Susan methodically clearing every corner of her lawn with military precision. Not a single leaf remained behind. An hour later, another breeze swept through the neighborhood. Within minutes, colorful leaves dotted her grass once again. She looked directly toward my house. I knew exactly what was coming. Sure enough, she crossed the street carrying a manila folder tucked beneath one arm. "I cleaned everything this morning." I noticed. She pointed towards several scattered leaves near her driveway. "And now they're back." I followed her finger. Most were bright red. A few were orange. One was yellow with a distinctive star-shaped outline. None resembled the long brown oak leaves lying beneath my tree. I bent down and picked one up. "This is a maple leaf. It blew from your yard." "I don't have a maple." She paused, then quickly replied, "Leaves travel." "I agree. So they're still your responsibility." I couldn't help smiling. "I don't think that's how wind works." Her expression hardened. "The HOA expects homeowners to prevent landscape nuisances. I rake every weekend. That isn't enough." She opened the folder and removed another document. "This is only a courtesy reminder." The word courtesy sounded strangely formal, coming from someone clearly frustrated. "If the issue continues." She let the sentence trail away before sliding the paper into my hand. I thanked her politely. She seemed almost disappointed that I hadn't argued. After she walked away, I stood quietly beside the curb studying the leaves scattered across both our properties. For the first time, I paid close attention to something I had overlooked before. The breeze wasn't blowing from my yard toward hers. It was moving in exactly the opposite direction. I glanced beyond Susan's backyard. Behind her property stretched a long row of mature red maples planted years earlier along the neighborhood's western boundary. Their branches were glowing brilliant crimson beneath the afternoon sun. Every few minutes, another wave of leaves drifted down from those trees. The wind lifted them effortlessly over the fence before scattering them across the surrounding yards, including Susan's. I didn't say anything. I simply watched. Landscape design had taught me one valuable lesson over the years. If you want to understand a garden, don't begin by looking at the ground. Watch the wind. That afternoon, I carried a small notebook onto my porch, wrote down the date, the weather, and the direction of the breeze. I wasn't trying to prove Susan wrong. I was simply becoming curious. And before long, that curiosity would reveal a pattern no one else in Brookstone Meadows had bothered to notice. From that afternoon on, I stopped looking at the leaves. I started watching the wind. Every morning before work, I carried a folding chair onto my front porch with a notebook, a cup of black coffee, and 10 quiet minutes to spare. The neighborhood woke up slowly. Sprinklers hissed across emerald lawns. Garage doors groaned open one by one. School buses rumbled through the subdivision while children hurried toward the corner carrying oversized backpacks. Above it all, the breeze moved without apology. Some mornings it barely stirred the branches. Other days it swept confidently through the entire neighborhood, lifting leaves into graceful spirals before carrying them across rooftops and sidewalks. I began writing everything down. Time, temperature, wind direction, tree species, where the leaves landed. Years of landscape design had trained me to notice patterns most people overlooked. Nature rarely behaved randomly. By the end of the first week, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. Whenever the wind came from the west, bright red maple leaves drifted over Susan's backyard fence. When it shifted from the northwest, they reached my driveway before continuing farther down the street. Only during calm evenings did the few brown oak leaves from my tree fall quietly beneath its own branches. They barely traveled at all. One Saturday afternoon, while I was spreading fresh mulch around the flower beds, Bill Thompson from 2 houses down wandered over carrying a rake across his shoulder. Settling in okay? Better every day. He glanced toward the oak. Beautiful tree. I think so. Then he looked toward Susan's backyard. You've been getting blamed for those leaves? I laughed softly. So you've heard. Bill chuckled. Half the neighborhood has. He leaned on the handle of his rake. Funny thing is, he pointed toward the long row of mature maples rising behind Susan's fence. Those trees have been dropping leaves into everyone's yards for 15 years. I looked where he pointed. The afternoon sunlight lit the crimson canopy like fire. Another gentle breeze arrived. Hundreds of maple leaves shimmered loose at once. Together, they floated over the fence exactly as my notes predicted. Bill smiled. Nature doesn't care about property lines. No, it really doesn't. As he continued home, I remained standing beneath my oak, watching the leaves drift through the golden light. For the first time, I realized I wasn't the only person who had noticed the truth. Most of the neighbors already knew. They simply preferred avoiding conflict. 2 days later, another email from Susan appeared. This one included 6 photographs instead of 3. The subject line had changed. Second courtesy notice. Her message was noticeably firmer. Repeated leaf accumulation originating from your property continues to create an unacceptable landscape condition. Further action may become necessary if corrective measures are not taken. I read it twice, then walked outside. The wind was blowing steadily from west to east, exactly as the weather forecast had predicted. Dozens of bright red maple leaves were gliding gracefully over Susan's fence while she stood in her backyard operating a leaf blower. Every few seconds, she cleared a section of grass. Every few seconds, another wave landed behind her. She never once looked up. Instead, she looked toward my house. It struck me that she had been watching the wrong direction all along. I quietly pulled my phone from my pocket. Not to record her, to record the trees, the breeze, the movement of the leaves. No commentary, no confrontation, just a simple, uninterrupted video showing exactly where they began and exactly where they ended. I slipped the phone back into my pocket as another gust rolled through Brookstone Meadows. Something told me autumn wasn't finished making its point, and neither was the wind. The more I observed, the less I needed to guess. Patterns have a way of becoming facts when you give them enough time. Over the next 2 weeks, I recorded short videos from the same spot on my front porch every afternoon. I never zoomed in on Susan's yard. I never filmed her. My camera stayed focused on the tree line behind her property, the direction of the breeze, and the colorful stream of maple leaves floating effortlessly over the privacy fence before settling across her lawn. Every clip told the same story. The wind never argued. It simply repeated itself. One Thursday evening, while reviewing the videos on my laptop, I noticed something I had missed before. The timestamps matched almost perfectly with the hourly weather reports posted online. Whenever the forecast predicted a steady west wind, the leaves appeared within minutes. When the air became calm, the movement stopped completely. My notebook was beginning to look less like a journal and more like a field study. The following Saturday brought the neighborhood's monthly volunteer cleanup. Residents gathered near the entrance with trash grabbers, rakes, gloves, and paper lawn bags. It was one of those traditions that had convinced me this community was worth joining. Susan was already there, wearing an HOA polo shirt embroidered with the neighborhood logo. She greeted everyone with practiced confidence. When I walked over carrying my rake, she offered a polite smile that disappeared almost instantly. "Ethan, good morning. I hope you've been keeping up with your leaves." "I've been keeping up with all of them." She didn't catch the meaning. Instead, she handed me a map assigning cleanup areas. By coincidence, or perhaps not, I was assigned to the western walking trail behind the neighborhood. The moment I reached the path, everything became even clearer. The towering row of mature red maples stretched for hundreds of feet behind the homes, including Susan's backyard. Their branches arched high above the fence line, and every breeze released another shimmering cascade of crimson leaves. Some landed on the trail. Some drifted into the drainage ditch. Many sailed directly toward the houses bordering the western edge of Brookstone Meadows, including Susan's. I quietly took several wide-angle photographs showing the full tree line, the fence, and the direction the leaves naturally traveled. No close-ups, no editing, just simple documentation. As I worked my way back through the neighborhood, Bill Thompson waved me over. "You finally saw them from the trail?" "I did." He laughed softly. "Now you understand why nobody around here argues with the wind." Another neighbor, Linda Foster, joined the conversation. "I've lived here 12 years, she said. Those maple trees have always covered the western lots every fall." She glanced toward Susan's house before lowering her voice. "I think she just refuses to believe it." I didn't answer. There wasn't anything left to debate. That afternoon, I organized everything into a single folder on my computer. Videos, photographs, weather reports, dates, simple observations. Nothing dramatic, nothing accusatory, just facts arranged in chronological order. As I finished, my phone vibrated. A new email notification appeared. This one wasn't labeled a courtesy notice. The subject line read, "Official HOA violation, landscape maintenance." I opened it slowly. According to the letter, I now had 7 days to correct the recurring leaf issue or face a monetary fine under the association's maintenance policy. I leaned back in my chair and read the notice a second time. Outside my window, another quiet breeze moved through the neighborhood. More bright red maple leaves floated gracefully over Susan's fence. For the first time since moving into Brookstone Meadows, I realized this was no longer about leaves. It had become about proving a story that nature had already been telling all along. I didn't respond to the violation notice that night. Not because I was intimidated, because I wasn't finished listening. The deadline Susan had given me was 7 days. I decided to spend every one of them doing exactly what I had been doing from the beginning. Observing, documenting, and letting the facts collect naturally. Each afternoon after work, I sat on my porch with my notebook while the neighborhood settled into its familiar rhythm. Children raced bicycles down the sidewalks. Dogs barked behind backyard fences. The scent of wood smoke drifted from someone's fire pit a few houses away. Above it all, the wind followed the same invisible path. West to east. Always west to east. On the 4th day, the weather forecast predicted the strongest autumn cold front of the season. Wind gusts between 30 and 40 miles per hour. I smiled when I read it. Not because I wanted anyone's yard covered in leaves, because nature was about to repeat its demonstration on a much larger scale. Saturday morning arrived beneath heavy gray clouds. The first gust rattled my front windows before sunrise. By 8 o'clock, the oak branches outside my house swayed steadily, dropping only a handful of brown leaves beneath their own canopy, exactly as they always had. Then I looked toward the western tree line. The towering maples were alive. Entire branches shimmered as thousands of crimson leaves broke free at once. The wind lifted them high above the neighborhood like a flock of birds before carrying them directly toward the homes along the western edge, including Susan's. I stepped onto my porch and started recording. One uninterrupted video. No zoom, no narration, only the sound of the wind rushing through the trees. Leaves poured over Susan's privacy fence in wave after wave. Some landed in her flower beds. Others blanketed the lawn she had spent weeks trying to keep spotless. Within minutes, the grass disappeared beneath a sea of red and orange. Across the street, Bill stepped outside holding a mug of coffee. He watched the scene unfold, then noticed me quietly filming the tree line. Without saying a word, he gave a slow nod. A few more neighbors wandered onto their porches. Nobody looked toward my oak. Everyone looked west. The evidence was impossible to miss now. Susan rushed into her backyard carrying her leaf blower. Its engine roared against the howl of the wind. She pushed leaves into neat rows. Seconds later, another gust erased all of her work. Again and again, it was like trying to sweep rain out of the sky. For nearly an hour, she fought the wind. The wind never noticed. I lowered my phone only after the storm began to weaken. The final video lasted just over 18 minutes. One continuous recording. No cuts. No edits. No opportunity for anyone to question what it showed. Later that afternoon, I transferred every photograph, weather report, timestamp, and video into a single presentation folder. The sequence told a complete story without a single opinion attached to it. Just dates, directions, trees, leaves, facts. As I saved the final file, another email appeared from the HOA board. The monthly association meeting had been moved to Monday evening. The first item listed on the agenda caught my attention immediately. Property Maintenance Violation Review, Lot 27. My house. My supposed leaf problem. I closed my laptop, looked once more at the quiet oak standing outside my window, and rested my father's old wooden rake against the porch. For weeks, Susan had believed the leaves were her strongest argument. She didn't realize they were about to become mine. Monday evening arrived with the crisp stillness that always follows a windy weekend. The parking lot outside the Brookstone Meadows clubhouse was already half full when I pulled in. Neighbors greeted one another with quiet smiles, carrying notebooks, bottled water, and stacks of HOA meeting agendas. The atmosphere felt less confrontational than I had expected. It felt curious. Word had clearly spread. I slipped my laptop into a canvas bag, picked up a small folder containing printed photographs, and walked inside. Susan stood near the front of the room, arranging paperwork behind the long board table. She barely glanced at me. When she did, her expression carried the quiet confidence of someone expecting an easy decision. The meeting followed its normal routine. Financial updates, pool maintenance, holiday decorating guidelines. Then the board secretary cleared her throat. The next agenda item is property maintenance violation, Lot 27. Every conversation in the room stopped. Susan stood. As everyone knows, repeated complaints have been documented regarding excessive leaf accumulation originating from Mr. Carter's oak tree. She projected several photographs onto the screen. The same close-up images of leaves scattered across her backyard. Without context, without showing the surrounding trees, without showing the direction of the wind. She finished by recommending that the violation stand and that the board approve the proposed fine. The HOA president sat down. The room remained quiet. Then the board chair looked toward me. Mr. Carter, would you like to respond? I stood slowly. Yes. I carried my laptop to the projector without rushing. I only have one request. The chairman nodded. Go ahead. I'd like everyone to watch a few uninterrupted videos before we discuss responsibility. No one objected. The lights dimmed slightly. The first recording began. No narration, only the sound of autumn wind moving through the trees. The camera faced the western tree line behind Susan's property. Thousands of crimson maple leaves lifted into the air before floating over the privacy fence. No oak leaves appeared. The second video showed the same scene on a different day. The third, another. Each carried a visible timestamp. Each matched the weather reports printed beside my photographs. I displayed a simple chart showing the wind direction recorded over 3 weeks. West to east. Every single day the complaints had been submitted. Then I placed one brown oak leaf beside one bright red maple leaf on the document camera. "You don't have to take my word for it," I said calmly. "You only have to look." The room stayed silent. Bill Thompson quietly spoke first. "That's exactly what we've all been seeing." Linda Foster nodded. "So have I." One by one, several neighbors added their own observations. No speeches, just simple facts. "I've watched those maples drop leaves into my yard for years. The wind always comes from the west. My backyard looks exactly the same." Susan shifted uncomfortably in her chair. For the first time since I had met her, she wasn't directing the conversation. She was listening to it. The board chair studied the photographs again. Then he looked toward the large screen still displaying my final video. Leaves rising from the western maples. Leaves crossing the fence. Leaves landing exactly where everyone could now see they belonged. He folded his hands. "I believe we've been focusing on the wrong tree." No one argued, because no one could argue with what they had just watched. The wind had become the most reliable witness in the room. And for the first time since this entire disagreement began, the evidence was no longer scattered across the neighborhood. It was sitting quietly in front of everyone. No one spoke for several long seconds. The only sound inside the clubhouse came from the projector fan quietly humming behind me. The final frame of my video remained frozen on the screen. Thousands of bright red maple leaves drifting over the western fence. The direction couldn't have been clearer. The board chairman leaned back in his chair and removed his reading glasses. "I've watched every frame twice." He looked toward the other board members. "Has anyone seen evidence that these leaves originated from Mr. Carter's oak?" One by one, they slowly shook their heads. Susan straightened the stack of papers in front of her. "The issue isn't only the species of leaf." Her voice remained controlled. "It's the repeated accumulation." I nodded politely. "I agree." Every eye turned toward me. Leaves accumulated. I clicked to the next slide. A simple aerial map of Brookstone Meadows appeared on the screen. No graphics. No dramatic arrows. Just property lines, the western tree line, and the prevailing wind direction taken directly from the local weather service. "I've lived here for 6 weeks." I said calmly. "Many of you have lived here for years." I looked toward Bill. He smiled slightly. "So I'd rather ask a question than make another statement." I faced the room. "How many of you who live along the western edge find maple leaves in your yard every autumn?" Hands began rising. First Bill, then Linda, then another couple sitting near the back. Within moments, nearly every homeowner from that side of the neighborhood had raised a hand. The chairman quietly counted. Susan looked around the room. For the first time, she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at her neighbors. Linda stood without being asked. "I've cleaned those same maple leaves every October since we moved here." Bill nodded. "So have we." Another resident added. "My backyard fills up even though I don't have a maple tree anywhere on my property." A few quiet laughs spread through the audience. Not mocking, just relieved. The conversation had finally become honest. The chairman folded his hands. "I think we've reached the point where the evidence speaks for itself." One board member cleared her throat. "I'd like to make a motion." Everyone turned toward her. "I move that the violation issued to Lot 27 be withdrawn immediately." Another board member spoke before anyone else could. "I'll second the motion." Susan remained silent. The chairman looked toward her. "Any additional discussion?" She glanced once more at the photographs lying on the table, then toward the frozen image of maple leaves covering the projection screen. Finally, she exhaled quietly. "No." The vote took less than 30 seconds. 5 hands rose. Unanimous. The violation was officially withdrawn. A wave of gentle applause moved through the room. Nothing loud, nothing theatrical, just neighbors acknowledging that something unnecessary had finally come to an end. The chairman wasn't finished. "I'd also recommend that future landscape complaints involving natural debris include a site inspection before violation notices are issued." Several homeowners nodded immediately. "So moved." Second. Another unanimous vote. The policy passed without objection. I closed my laptop and returned it to my bag. As people began gathering their papers, Susan slowly approached me. She didn't carry a clipboard this time, only the empty violation folder. I was convinced your oak was the problem. Her voice had lost its sharp edge. I know. I should have looked beyond my own fence. I smiled politely. The wind already had. For the first time, she gave a small, genuine smile. Not because she had won, because she finally understood. Outside the clubhouse, the evening air felt unusually calm. Not a single leaf moved across the parking lot. But everyone knew another breeze would eventually come. The difference was that no one would blame the wrong tree again. Or so we all believed. The following morning, I stepped onto my porch with a cup of coffee and found something waiting beside my old wooden rake that made me stop in my tracks. The next morning, I opened my front door expecting nothing more than another quiet autumn day. Instead, I found a neatly folded handwritten note resting against my father's old wooden rake. There was no envelope, no signature on the outside, only a single maple leaf pressed beneath a smooth river stone to keep the paper from blowing away. I picked it up and unfolded it. The handwriting was familiar. Ethan, I spent weeks looking at your tree. I should have been looking at the wind. Susan. I stood there for a long moment, reading the note a second time while the neighborhood slowly came to life around me. Some apologies arrived with speeches. Others fit on 4 simple lines. I slipped the note into my shirt pocket, not because I planned to keep score, because it reminded me that people sometimes change after the facts become impossible to ignore. By the following weekend, Brookstone Meadows looked exactly as it always had in autumn. Children chased piles of colorful leaves across front yards. Neighbors laughed while filling paper lawn bags. Leaf blowers hummed in the distance before giving way to the steady scrape of wooden rakes across sidewalks. Nothing about the season had changed, only the way people talked about it. At the next HOA newsletter, a new paragraph appeared beneath the landscaping section. Seasonal leaf movement caused by natural weather conditions shall not, by itself, constitute a maintenance violation. Future concerns involving landscape debris will include on-site observation before enforcement action. It wasn't a dramatic announcement. There were no bold headlines. Just a quiet policy update tucked between reminders about mailbox paint colors and holiday decorations. Yet everyone understood why it was there. A few days later, I saw Susan working in her front yard. She paused when I walked by carrying my rake. "Morning, Ethan." "Morning." She looked toward the line of towering maples behind her property. Another gentle breeze loosened dozens of crimson leaves. We both watched them drift across the neighborhood without saying a word. Finally, she smiled. "I've started appreciating autumn a little more. I think it's easier once you stop trying to control it." She laughed softly. "I suppose. That's true." As I continued my walk, I noticed something else. Several neighbors were no longer rushing to blow every single leaf away. Some left small piles beneath their trees for birds and squirrels. Others talked about composting. A few even planted native shrubs along their fences the following spring. It was remarkable how one misunderstanding had quietly changed the conversation from blame to stewardship. Months later, after winter had stripped every branch bare, I hung my father's old wooden rake back inside the garage. Its handle was worn smooth from years of use. I ran my hand across the faded wood and remembered what he had told me all those years ago. Leaves always come back. He had been right. Every autumn, they would return. The wind would carry them wherever it pleased. No HOA rule could rewrite the seasons. No accusation could change the direction of the breeze. Looking back, I realized this story had never really been about leaves. It wasn't even about an HOA president. It was about how easily assumptions can take root when we stop paying attention to the truth unfolding right in front of us. Justice didn't arrive because I argued louder. It arrived because I stayed patient long enough for the evidence to speak. Sometimes the strongest witness isn't a lawyer, a document, or a meeting. Sometimes it's a quiet October wind carrying a handful of leaves exactly where they were always meant to go. And every time autumn returns to Brookstone Meadows, I still smile when the breeze moves through the trees. Because I know something the entire neighborhood understands now. The wind never lies.